Shared Parenting, him here with us today. So Mark has a lot of information to share with us today. I want to take a quick second to introduce myself as Dawn McCarty. I am the CEO of Securing Everything, and I work very closely with Hope4Family and with Danica to help bring awareness for children to have access to both parents, which kind of goes right along with what efforts Mark has made in what he does. So Mark, I'm going to toss that over to you and let you introduce and explain to the world what you do.
Thanks a lot. Well, thanks too for both of you for all the awareness that you help to bring to the table. I always say it's just neat that we have such a great community. There's so many strengths and talents that everybody has. My area tends to be more the legislative arena. I've got a 35-year background in politics, going all the way back to my college days. And so when the situation arose, I usually try not to talk too much about my personal situation publicly, just out of respect to Levi. I don't want him to grow up and hear all kinds of stuff about his mom, whether it's true or not. It's something that he deserves the right to be able to have kept quiet. But obviously, as you can imagine, I went through a situation like many of us have gone through. And at the time, I was being groomed to run for a potential Speaker of the House and Governor of Missouri, and was actually getting ready to file a campaign finance reports to start the campaign when my situation began.
Oh,
and
wow.
I had a decision to make. Do I continue my political career or be a dad? And there was no contest. I mean, it was, I had people from the party approaching me saying, you can still do this. We can pull this off. And I was like, well, maybe you can. But at the time I was going through a pretty rough, I went 204 days without seeing him, obviously not by my choice. And I couldn't focus on anything. I mean, there was nothing on my mind except I wanted to see my son. And so I ended up putting that career on hold. And it's not to get over spiritual with people, but you go through this philosophical questioning of why, I thought my whole life had been groomed to go this direction. And now this curveball hit. And then I got hit with some medical challenges at the same time that got pretty serious for a while. And as I came out of that, it's almost like I got this answer of this was why, is you were supposed to use all these political connections and political knowledge that you have and the experiences, not to be a governor, but to be able to fight for kids and have a personal testimony of what it was like going through that. And I'm pretty much at peace now. I don't think I will ever have, they still approach me all the time about running for office here. But first off, I wouldn't do it while Levi's still in school, because I only get to see him on weekends. And that's not the kind of life that I want for him, where I would be gone 4 days a week and who knows whether my calls would be answered during that period of time. And then on weekends, you've got town hall meetings and meetings with constituents and ribbon cuttings and Eagle Scout ceremonies. And so I definitely won't, but I'm pretty much at peace that if all I do is I can help contribute to the shared parenting community and help, as I always say, educate, enable, and empower other people on what they need to do in their state. I'm fully aware of the fact no one person is going to change this, and no one organization is. It's each one of us have different skills, talents, and abilities that we contribute to the community. And I think my biggest goal right now is that's it. I don't want to be the person who gets the change passed. I'd rather educate 1,000 people so they're equipped to know what they need to do.
Right.
When I came onto the scene about 5 years ago, when after the health challenges, I started getting active. I spent a year exploring the community, and I never like to just dive into something. I like to spend some time analyzing, figuring out, okay, where are the strengths? Where are the weaknesses? Where are the gaps? And the biggest gap I found was in educating people on the legislative process. What I saw a ton of, 6 years ago was people wanting to protest at courthouses and threaten judges, threaten legislators. And I understand their frustrations. Trust me, any of us can know that frustration of just, you're fuming and you just want to lash out. The challenge is the opposition has fed the narrative that we're a bunch of angry dads and people with anger management problems. So when you go to a courthouse and you're around other people that have that same, animosity built up inside them, the same emotions, the same anger, you're feeding off each other. And you're not talking as rational anymore. It almost becomes I'm going to one up this person on how mad I am. And I'm going to one up and you don't even realize you're doing it. But the outside world looks at it and they're like, oh my gosh, look at those people. And a good example is January 6th. I'm about as hardcore conservative as it comes. And I was there January 6th. I don't know if you knew, but my filming went on news stations all across the country. Matter of fact, the FBI was parked outside my house when I came back because my film was.
Oh, wow.
And, just to clarify, I never went in the building. And that's why I've been around Washington enough to know that whether you have access to that entrance or not, we know we're not supposed to be in that building. And the narrative, even though those people, I understand, because I'm one of them who agrees that there were some challenges with the election integrity, but you don't go storming the Capitol on the inside. I have no problem with people doing what I was doing and making your voice heard outside the Capitol. But once you step inside the Capitol, you've just framed the narrative for the opposition. And sadly, that's what we've allowed ourselves to do, is people allow the emotions to take over. And I have so many friends of mine in the legislature that say their first exposure to anything to do with shared parenting and custody issues was an angry parent yelling at them on the phone saying, why didn't you do something about it? Well, until they're educated, how can they do something about something they don't realize is a problem? I'm the same way. 11 years ago, if somebody would have told me that one parent only got to see their kid every other weekend, I'm sad to admit, but I would have said, well, yeah, isn't that the way it is? Until it happened to my kid. And I realized it was my kid missing out on those memories, my kid missing out on that bonding. And I started diving into the research of how bonding really does start, and those first 2 years are so critical to the bonding process. But before I was educated on that, I wouldn't have thought there was a problem. So the first thing we have to do with legislators is put ourselves in their shoes and give them the benefit of the doubt. So whenever I meet with a legislator, I don't ever talk. I ask questions first. Hey, what are your thoughts on custody situations? Do you have a family member, or have you ever dealt with a custody situation? Do you have someone close to you that's ever dealt with it? And I want to find out, where are they coming from before I just cram something down their throat. And after watching just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Facebook Lives and pictures and dialogues on different custody issues on Facebook, I started realizing that's my niche. My niche is teaching people how to connect with the legislators.
You have so much going on in there, Mark. Sorry, is that my mic? I hope that's not my mic. Yeah. You have so much going on in there. And I want to make a couple of comments on some of the things that you said. And you were talking about Levi's feelings and how he might feel someday. And I think I can relate to that because I am the child in the scenario where I am an adult survivor of severe parental alienation with abduction. So I've had an extreme situation that I didn't know I was going through for most of my life. I didn't realize that a lot of the things that was going on with me and some of the fallout or those long-term effects were following me along as I grew up and as I went through life. I didn't have some of the things I should have had that comes naturally, like you said, that bonding experience. So it's super important, and I commend you for taking the time to consider Levi, first of all, to give him that consideration of what you do as far as a career even, and you've sacrificed so much for his sake. And that's huge. That really is a huge thing. And then what you do, bringing that forward and then still thinking ahead and about the politicians and what they think and what they might know or what they may not know is super important in how we approach them. And you've touched on a couple of those other areas too, where if we're all in there having this reaction where we're not really thinking our way through, but we're just reacting to situations, which a lot of us do. It's part of being human. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it's true. It's the perception of how we're being viewed. So I love all of that stuff that you opened with and touched on. And I just commend you for the work that you're doing and trying to make a difference as far as it goes with the legislation. And a lot of organizations are out there, like you said, we're all trying to work together here with Hope4Families and Kids Need Both. And even my company trying super hard to protect the sanctity of childhood and the fact that they do need access to both parents. We didn't come into this world with one parent, we came in with two, and that's super important. So thank you again for all of the work that you do. I think that is very commendable. And I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad we have this opportunity to bring this discussion to everybody that's out there watching.
You know, what I get is that you've got to let down it can't be an us versus them conversation, because then you're just surviving each other and you're not really getting into the other person's world. And that was kind of that was a very similar approach in dealing with the children in my situation, their school. You know, I couldn't just assume that they were my enemy. And even if they were treating me not very friendly, I had to assume that we're all on the same team trying to raise the children together. And it just shifts the whole context, and it has people let their guard down and able to, you know, and just bridge that gap. And it seems like, in Mark, I see you all the time, you know, you're substitute teaching in your child's school. You went from being a political candidate to being willing to do what it takes, the humbleness that it takes to even become a substitute teacher because of your stand for your commitment with your son.
That's awesome. That's a way to get involved.
Yeah, I've loved doing the substitute teaching. I had to get creative. Fortunately, his school's been very good. They understand the situation. And, you know, normally, without going into details, the calls normally aren't answered from Sunday to Friday usually. And so I knew early on, I didn't want him going Sunday through Friday with no contact at all. And so in kindergarten, I started surprising him at lunch once a week. And I would pick either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And at the time I was working for some doctors. So it was literally a 20-minute drive to get to his school and run through a drive-through on the way to pick something up, to get 5 minutes with him and drive back to work. But I started doing that, and I didn't miss a week. And then I kept up through first grade and second grade. And it got to, I started feeling like Norm on Cheers when I would walk in the whole cafeteria, Mr. Ludwig. But once he hit about fourth grade, about halfway through fourth grade, it started not being as cool to have Dad show up anymore.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they put the notice out. They were in bad need of substitute volunteer teachers. He goes to a very small school, and so they rely on parents a lot. So I was like, heck yeah, I'll do it. So
sign me up. Yeah.
I finally get to see him for, you know, just walking down the hallway to his, you know, because I don't always get to teach his class, but I tell you, even for 15 seconds of seeing him walk down the hallway it's worth it.
Well, and he knows you're there. That's the important part, is he knows you're there. You're present. And that is comforting. And it must be comforting for him.
It's, you know, it's the seeds that we plant. Really, you know, you can't go into this thing. This is not a short game. This is the long game. This is about, like, and I always, you know, tell my co-parenting participants that I'm like, you've got your children. We all have inherited ways of being. We inherited from our parents, and we go into adult life with pretty much only inherited things that we've picked up from our families. And then so it's important to have, for our children, to give them the inheritance of all this good stuff and try to eliminate the bad stuff as much as possible. And,
Yeah. So Mark, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's coming up. So you have a conference coming up in the next couple of weeks, and some of the topics I think are very interesting. So you're going to be talking about some of the top 20 mistakes that shared parenting advocates make and how they can avoid those. And I think that's got to be a very important topic, and how to identify the right sponsor for a bill. So there's a whole lot more that you're going to be sharing there, but would you take a moment to talk about this conference and what is the main purpose and the main outcome you would like to see?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, my goal is not for me to be the answer, because no one person is going to be. You know, there's personality clashes. You know, I can guarantee you everyone watching doesn't like my personality, but they don't like every personality. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us come into this thinking that somehow we're going to change the world because we're so wonderful. And then you start realizing, no, that's not going to happen. And it's the same way with dealing with legislators. You know, I'm on the far spectrum on the conservative side. Well, we need to reach the far other side of the spectrum too. So I have to acknowledge that if I can train someone on the other side of the spectrum to be able to talk in their language a little better, we're going to be a lot more powerful. And so that's the whole goal of next weekend, is to educate people and also try to find out, are there some hidden gems in our community that we've never seen? So far I've been involved in 29 states actively working on legislation, dealing with legislators, dealing with different advocates. And I've been amazed every city that I've gone to, there were people who just looked on Facebook like they were just shining stars and not in any way putting them down. But when you saw them in person, you realize, you know what? I don't think they know as much and are as finessed as they looked like on Facebook. But then I also noticed there were some other people that I had never heard their name, never known who they were. And I watched them talking with legislators, and I was sitting back in amazement, like, oh my gosh, these people are great. And so my goal is to try and next weekend identify, or there's some more people like that we can help identify, to connect, because each state is different. You can't really take one template and say, this is going to work in every state. You've got Republican states, Democrat states, you've got super majorities, and a super majority is not even remotely the same as having a majority in a state. You've got states with term limits. You've got 2-year cycle. There's so many different things going on. So I'm going to talk
all these variables.
Yeah, I'm going to talk in principles that they can apply to any state that they're working on, but then talk about what are those variables. And I do think the top 20 mistakes is going to be very good, because those are actual live things that I witnessed myself, that you need somebody. I've been very fortunate to be mentored by great people over these last 35 years. That I always used to give the example when I used to do public speaking, but back when Albert Pujols was big in St. Louis, even Albert Pujols had a batting coach, because you need somebody who's outside looking in, that you may not notice that your elbow is just slightly drooping every single at bat. But a third party, unemotionally attached, can look and say, hey, you're dropping your elbow. That's why you're missing those pitches. Mm-hmm. We need the same thing. If we're going in by ourselves and meeting with legislators and not doing a proper analyzation and debriefing after every meeting, we're messing up. So I've got, Ed Martin, who those who follow me hear me talk about him all the time. He was the youth advisor to Pope John Paul II. He's been a presidential advisor to 4 presidents. He's the head of the Phyllis Schlafly Foundation, who Phyllis was the first one talking about fatherless society and what was going to happen with Title 4D. But Ed and I have been very, very good friends since he was chief of staff for Governor Blunt in Missouri. And almost every time I go to Washington, D.C., not almost every time I go to Washington, D.C., Ed and I will have a phone call for about an hour and a half before we go, and we'll lay out a game plan and some goals. And every time we have one afterwards, and Ed asked me the tough questions. Hey, did you find out their why? Why would they be interested in this? What hits their hot button? And I need someone like that, so that I don't walk out of there posting pictures on Facebook of how great Mark Ludwig is and think I've done a wonderful job. And I think everybody has a tendency to feel some of that. And I think it's okay to have some pride in accomplishment when you've had successful meetings.
You want to do it more.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And I tell you, the biggest thing I learned growing up about government was from Schoolhouse Rock on Saturday mornings.
Yeah, I love that.
I still remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like Ed that can force me to answer the tough questions, to say, what did I do that needs to be changed to be even better for the next meeting I go in? Absolutely. And so I'm hoping next weekend we can develop sort of a peer group that we can have some follow-up conference calls to be bouncing ideas off each other, to be sort of that iron sharpens iron type of an organization. Yeah. But we do have some we have some great speakers coming in. Ed is going to be on. He'll be on by video from DC, so he won't be able to make it in person. But Ed is somebody who's very attuned to our issue. He was personally groomed by Phyllis the 5 years before she died to take over her organization, even over and above her own kids.
Oh, wow.
So that gives you an idea how much she thought of Ed. Wow. And Title 4D reform and equal shared parenting is one of the actual platforms on the Eagle Council now. And I've said it before, it's very unfortunate, but the shared parenting community is not even on the radar screen of most members of US Congress. Most organizations pay people $500,000 a year, $1 million a year to live in Washington, D.C. and 100% advocate for a cause like pro-life or Second Amendment or those other issues. And there's hundreds of them. I mean, the pro-life issue, there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of full-time pro-life advocates that are making six-figure incomes doing nothing but advocating for pro-life issues in DC.
Wow.
And we have no one.
And the thing is shared parenting. I would assert that shared parenting touches everybody in some way. They know somebody who is in a blended family, or, you know, not everybody has to deal with, thank God, high conflict custody situations, but everybody knows somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
well, this really looks
the challenge is that we have no one really there. So we only have two options. Option number one, educate 1,000 people and raise $10 million in 12 months to try and get our issue changed. Or while we're in the process of doing that, partner with other larger groups that already have those advocates and get our issue added to that platform. And so that's why for the last 6 years, I've been going to CPAC. I've had some very good conversations with their policy directors. I've been to DC a lot to their headquarters. Family Research Council, Tony Perkins, the head of that, very big advocate of our issue. But the crack through the door was getting Ed to get Eagle Council to officially have our issue as one of their issues. Now we've got some credibility and leverage because nobody wants to be the first one. But Eagle Council, Phyllis Schlafly, Ed Martin are very well known and respected in DC. So now when you go to another organization like Family Research Council or CPAC, and you mention Ed Martin, and you mention that our topic has been discussed at the last 2 annual conferences for Eagle Council, now we have leverage of, oh, wow, you're on Eagle Council's platform. Yeah, we need to pay attention to that.
Yep. So this is a great opportunity for people to get involved because I work with a national parents organization, and what I see happening is this has got to be a grassroots movement. It's got to be the people. And, you know, I think having the conference that you're putting together gives them that opportunity to come in and learn what it takes to push a bill through, or even to get one started, even to get a sponsor for it. These are all things that are just very time consuming, and you really have to know who you're talking to. You have to have those connections. So it's really not something that we can just walk into, you know, our Capitol building, right? And just say, okay, I want to talk to somebody about this. And we sit down and have a discussion. It takes a lot more than that. So you're paving the way. You're kind of giving people a place to land and to come in and have a place to learn what it really takes. And I think that's phenomenal. That is actually phenomenal.
It's a skill, not a talent, which a skill can be learned.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Gina and Brian in Arkansas, you know, they started coming to our conferences 3 years ago. They had never been involved in politics, had never been to a political event, had never been to their state capital, had never been involved in anything. And they started coming to our events and taking notes. They would always sit on the front row. And then Patrick and Gina started calling me on a regular basis. Matter of fact, they literally painted my condo. This is a true story because they wanted to spend more time with me. And they thought Levi had done had hooked a magic marker to the end of a string one day. And he was going zing. And I'm in the kitchen not noticing what's happening. And I'm like, Levi, don't do that. Why are you doing that? And I see his eyes going like this. And this poor wall here had a whole ring stripe. And so I did like 1.5 years of Facebook Lives with black blotches all over this wall. And Patrick and Gina called because they were calling every night asking for ideas and information. And they would meet with a legislator and then they call for a debrief like I do with Ed. And then one weekend they showed up my condo, spent the whole weekend here talking, asking questions and painting my condo for me.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
I'll tell you what, they dug in and it wasn't me. I was just like the Ed Martin. They did the work. You know, I only made one live trip to Arkansas for one of the hearings, but it was Patrick, Ed, and Gina with no background, no nothing. This year passed the strongest shared parenting law in the country. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so a lot of people think, well, gosh, I don't have the background. I don't think I can do it. No, you can do it. If you have the desire, we can teach you the principles that you need to know to be effective. And fortunately, I've got enough contacts, and with Ed and some other people I know, there's not a state in the country that I don't know at least 5 or 10 legislators sympathetic to our cause, that I can get people a start. Texas is a prime example. Brian Hughes, the senator that passed the law in Texas this year. That's how that law got started. Brian and I used to have a very large Amway business years ago. I had a very, very large one all across the country. I had about 4,000 people in my downline, and my sponsor and I would rent convention halls. We rented the Freedom Arena, the Georgia Dome down in Georgia. We had 72,000 people at one event down there. Well, Brian was part of that organization. And so I guess it was 4 years ago, I went down and met with Brian, with Rustin Wright and Stuart McMillan and Josh Jaros. And we all met with Senator Hughes down there. Well, it turns out he's the one who ended up sponsoring the bill that passed this year. There was one bill, 803, that was the equal shared parenting bill that didn't get passed. But while everybody was focusing on that, we were behind the scenes working on this other bill on radar that changed from standard possession to expanded standards possession in Texas. And that just went into law a couple weeks ago. But we've got connections. And that's once again why we need people here this weekend, is those connections and resources. Sometimes there's stuff that won't be said on Facebook, but in a hallway, you'll hear a conversation where somebody mentions a name or mentions a connection, and somebody says, wait, who did you say? That's who we need to get to. And all of a sudden, boom, the doors opened up and a law gets passed.
This is the beauty of working together and collaborating and sharing what you know and who you know. And so people coming in, they may not realize that they know somebody until they get there. So as they're going through this conference that you're sharing, and you're talking about things like what worked for these states, for Arkansas, for Tennessee, for Oklahoma. There's several states that pass laws. Florida, we have passed a little bit of the law. We got a little bit closer to it. We're not, we haven't made it solid, but it's getting closer. And because other states and our state are making these strides, the more people that get involved and come in and collaborate might have the one thing that one state needs.
Oh, definitely.
Yep.
So the thing, and it's no secret that you are more conservative, and yet what could a person benefit from for going to your conference? Obviously, it's about educating people about how government works. So a person with no real leanings could come there and learn something, and or even if somebody was more on the progressive end. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and that's one thing and that's one thing I do pride myself on, is in Missouri, I've got a pretty good reputation. Matter of fact, I got an award sitting on my wall over there that I got from a Democrat in Missouri. This is before the shared parenting. I used to do a lot of work with charities in Missouri. And they gave me a proclamation that honored me for a lot of my awards with charity work. And that was presented to me by one of my good friends at the time, who was about as liberal as you could get. And so what I tell people is, you've got to check the emotions at the door. And it's a shame because that doesn't happen too much nowadays. But you always hear the example of Tip O'Neill in DC, that, he would yell at people, and then they'd be having a beer 2 hours later after work in DC on the way home. And so I've always separated the issue from the person. And I don't care how much I dislike a person for their issues. I've always made it a point to where the phone's always open, the door's always open. And I don't know of any legislator in Missouri that I couldn't call and get on the phone, even the most staunch Democrat. Because we always have common ground. I don't believe anybody, even my biggest opponent on the Democrat side, I just can't picture someone saying, I'm going to run for office because I'm going to mess things up for everybody. No, they have a goal to make things better. Now, we may disagree on how we're going to get there, but we're in agreement on the goal. So the key is to find out, okay, we do have common ground already in the end goal. Now, what else do we have common ground on? Somewhere else there's got to be, and so work from the far end back instead of working on where you are forward. And so many people do that. They disagree with someone on an issue, so they dislike that person. I tend to do the reverse. Begin with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey says. What do I have in common with that person? And let's find some more common ground. And because you can never afford to burn your bridges. And I see this is one of those top 20 mistakes. I see people where a bill doesn't get passed one year, and they're going to give somebody a piece of their mind to let them know how bad they did. Well, unfortunately, 2 years later, that person becomes the Speaker of the House or the chair of the committee that you need. And I won't say which states right now, but there are 3 states right now that a bill will never be passed in those states as long as a certain person is in office. And that person is literally stated it's because people gave them a piece of their mind when they were a nobody. And now they're the chair of the committee or a powerful majority position in their state. And there's no term limits in those particular states. And they've literally said, while I'm in office, there will never be equal shared parenting bill in my state. So you can't afford to burn any bridges.
No.
Right. Wow.
Oh, man.
Wow. That's like,
This is so exciting.
But you also have to talk to people differently. Elizabeth Warren, who is about as far as you can get from me. But I'll tell you what, her and I had some great meetings in Washington, D.C. on Title IV-D reform that I never would have thought, because you need to change how you talk. Elizabeth Warren wants nothing to do with fathers' rights, nothing to do with anything that she considers a man's issue. But what she does fight for is the oppressed. And when she hears that there are people in debtor's prison that can't afford an attorney, that are being put in prison, that resonates with her. Mm-hmm. And we had a very, very good discussion about that. So
and the children's aspect too, the child's perspective is also being, they're being oppressed. Their rights, their inalienable right to having access to both loving and available and safe parents, that's being taken from them, which is, that's the very definition. So every one of them should be on board with protecting the child's rights.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about this weekend too. We're going to talk about what we call the Leesburg Grid. And in the Leesburg Grid, people will get an understanding of how to talk to different legislators based on their political leanings. Because you're going to use very different verbiage to a Republican than you will to a Democrat or a Libertarian. And we're going to talk about how you talk. And I've had we have a lot of great Democrats on board. We have LaShawn Ford that sponsored our bill in Illinois. New Jersey is almost all Democrat sponsors of our bill. So we do have some very good Democrats on board across the country. And but we're going to be talking about how do you talk to those people differerently.
Yeah, it's all in the way, the perspective and the way you say it and the way you address it.
Yeah, I've run into several judges that they're like, I don't really care about the rights of the parents. They are a stand for the best interest of the child. And these are judges that are actually mean it from the purity of it, in the knowing that the best thing for the child is equal access to both parents. And that's the way it should be, because it's not a father's rights conversation. It's not a mother's rights conversation. It's about, a child's rights, a child's birth.
Nail on the head. That's one of the top 20 things too, is so many people come in and trying to frame it about a mother's right or a dad's right.
As a constitutional right, even.
Yeah, legislators could care less about that.
Right.
What's going to resonate with the legislators when you move it from the head to the heart and you talk about a kid. Because everybody has sympathy for a
that's
kid.
why I do what I do, because I think I bring that child's perspective. And I hear over and over again, there was one case, I think it was last year, I think it was Pennsylvania, that I heard in the courtroom that they recorded that the one person had said, well, if you do this, judge, then this poor child's going to have to travel back and forth an hour to an hour from. And I'm livid. I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute, excuse me. I was missing from my parent, my father, for 44 years. So if I had that 1 hour to and from, I would give anything to have had that time with him. And so we can't paint the narrative that way, where it's, oh, the poor child in that 1 hour. Let's compound those hours. So let's times that 1 hour twice in one weekend by the year. And then however many years they have lost contact with that parent. So that's what you're taking from that child. And I can't stand by and continue to allow people to paint that kind of narrative without sharing the devastating long-term results of what a child goes through when a parent is forcibly removed from their lives. And
that's a good point. We're going to be bringing a lot. Yeah, we're going to be bringing a lot of those examples up this weekend, talking about how to handle objections that are pretty common, because that's a very common one that comes up. And yet people have no problem with somebody, Levi had a cross country meet last weekend. It was an hour and a half drive each way. And nobody thinks there's anything wrong with a parent driving an hour and a half to a cross country meet or a volleyball or a basketball game. But oh my gosh, an hour in a car with their own parent to talk about school that day?
What we have to get them used to is that kids are going to end up having two homes. They're going to have two beds. They're going to have, that's just what's happening. And the child will adapt to that as long as the parents can remain healthy. They'll be able to adapt. It's when the parents they continue with that conflict that it becomes the child's conflict.
Actually,
and not to blame parents. I'm just saying that's just what happens, right? We kind of know that's kind of what, by design, what's going on in a high conflict situation where the kid is always having to maybe even choose sides. We know the extent. I don't want to get too far into that part, but it's hard for the child to navigate through that.
I think that sometimes even on the legislature end, but definitely we get used to what's normal practice, what's historically the norm, and we're completely blind to how dysfunctional it is. So it's completely dysfunctional to have one parent be fully responsible for a child's needs solo for 2 weeks solid, and they only get 2-day break. And it's totally dysfunctional for a parent to try to be a parent in 48 hours every other weekend. That's dysfunctional and stressful.
And there's daycare, there's all that. I have to make arrangements, and maybe it would be easier if they could work together on those, so I see exactly what you're saying.
But they don't even have to be. I mean, you can have two parents that just the bridge was burned, and if they're rotating every 7 days, they don't even have to see each other. That child learns that this is my home environment. This is with my dad's, and they'll even talk about it. They're like, this is my home with my dad. This is my home with my mom. But I guarantee you, if the child is only seeing a parent every other weekend, that's not their home. They're visiting their parents' home. And judges are all about, it's not good for them to be back and forth. And I'm like, what do you think we do when we put our child on a school bus for 7 hours a day? We're putting them in a different environment that they have to adapt to.
Right. So these are all the important issues. And Mark, you said you're going to be bringing up a lot of these in those, some of those topics that you're talking about during your conference.
Yeah, we'll be talking about too, once again, how to handle these with a conservative versus a liberal when you're talking to people in the legislature. But once again, creating, and we're going to do sort of a roundtable discussion on the objections. There's some formats where it's better to almost talk at people when you're presenting stuff, but there's other that just are so much better in a group dynamic. So that particular one, we're going to be doing a sort of a roundtable discussion on how to handle covering objections.
I want to get the link out real quick to share with our audience. Is this
I shared the link. I've got on the chat, but I can actually.
Is that the one to register for his conference?
They can register two ways. They can some people are very involved in Mark's Facebook page. And we also have that link on Hope4Families.net. So I want to share the Hope4Families.net page. And
okay.
And you can register right there. There's several ways to register on this for the event. In fact, Mark, I'm going to have you talk about the different kinds of tickets that are available.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, this year we're doing the virtual, thanks to Danica. I've always wanted to do virtual. I have no technical skills. Back when Moses and I played together, there wasn't the internet back then. And, so I literally have no computer skills whatsoever. But so in the past, with the previous 3 years, we've done in person. And I just love in person just because I love being able to connect with people, the relationships that are built, the friendships that are built that you just can't get virtually. But I also acknowledge that in our community, most non-custodial parents are working their tail off trying to pay their bills and child support and attorney fees, and they just don't have the money, and then they don't have the time. And what if it's a weekend with their kid?
Right.
It's very tough for me to give up a weekend with Levi. I mean, it has to be a high priority. So this year, thanks to Danica, we're able to do a virtual. I think we're going to start doing more of these down the line. This will be sort of our beginning rollout of some of these. But so we do have both regular tickets or VIP. The VIP, obviously, to help raise funds. I don't mind going to all the different states, but what people don't realize is, well, when I go to a different state, there's airfare, there's hotel, there's car rental, there's expenses there. And meanwhile, I'm not earning money while I'm gone. The 1 year I went to literally 24 different states. And at the time, we don't have the funding now, but at the time I was making $1,500 a month salary. And I had people complaining, saying, oh, he's making money off the community. I'm like, why don't you try giving up your job and living on $1,500 a month while you're going to 24 cities in 1 year, putting in 12-hour days in those cities?
That's the beauty of taking it virtual, so then you can be everywhere.
Yeah, but but with the so the VIP tickets is to help raise funding, because there are some states that I do think that I have some special connections with some of the legislators that I would be a little more effective being there in person. And so we have both a regular and a VIP. The VIP is basically an extra contribution to help us. But for that, we are going to have 3 town hall conference calls afterwards following, because so many people, I know myself, I'll go to a conference and then on the drive home or on the airplane home, I'm thinking of a million questions I wish I would have asked. So we're going to be having 3 follow-up conference calls staggered so that people who have questions after the conference, that maybe they want more specifics for their state. And every one of these conference calls will have someone there, whether it's Ed Martin himself that'll be on one of these conference calls, Charlie from Leadership Institute, or one of the senators from Missouri that'll be on that call. So it's kind of a neat extra benefit that they're going to get for donating the money for the VIP ticket.
I think this is huge. I'm so great and so honored to be able to be involved in person. I'm flying in to St. Louis.
On your birthday, by the way.
On my birthday, yeah.
Oh my God, talk about commitment.
I was, we were talking about how I could handle the virtual side of it from Florida, but I was like, well, why not? That would be fun to go.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Road trip. But yeah, like there's a value. Huh?
Pick me up on your way by.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Dawn, we need you here.
Yes.
I invited Don Hubin. I wanted to get him here because I just think the world of him. We've had a few conference calls with him and me and Casey. Yeah. And Casey's flying up from Florida from TFRM. But Don's got some kind of commitment. He can't make it. But I would have loved to have had Don.
I'll think about it. I might be able to swing it. We'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, Don, that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
There's somebody on the thread that says that they're coming in from Oregon.
Oh, wow.
So,
which person is that?
All right. I'm trying. Oh, wait. Alex. This is Alex Eli.
Alex, I don't know if I know you yet, but we do have a very active team in Oregon, extremely active. I was up there myself a year and a half ago. And I'll tell you what, Oregon has some great advocates and they've made some good progress. So I definitely want to get with him when he's in St. Louis to connect him if he's not connected with the groups already working out there.
And that's the value of coming in person. I mean, online, it's great. At least you didn't miss it, but being in person and being able to meet the people and have these side conversations that you just don't have access to when you're participating online.
Right.
Well, even some of the legislators that I'm going to have, they're all from Missouri, but as I've said before, no state wants to be the first state to pass something, but no state wants to be the last. And they'll always ask you, what are other states doing? Well, if somebody's never been to their capital, has no credibility, no background in politics, you'd be surprised what a door opener it is when you call the gatekeeper and say, I just met with Senator Eigel in Missouri, and he recommended that I call, when you're speaking to your state senator, that I recommend to speak to Senator so-and-so about this issue. Because if you just call, it's nothing, but, another senator recommended this?
Yeah.
And all senators are going to do that. So when Bill's there, I can guarantee you he's going to say, I recommend you call your, now he won't say it one-to-one to every person, but he'll say, I recommend you call your state senator. So what you need to do then, hey, when I was in Missouri last weekend with Senator Bill Eigel, he recommended that I call you and talk to you about this issue. Do you have 15 minutes to meet with me? And you'd be surprised how that notches you up on their radar screen.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I would love to come and support this. I think excellent opportunity. One, because I have a lot to learn. I might have been running the chair for Florida for NPO, but there's so much that I don't know. And
well, you bring up a great point, Dawn. Even myself, I'm amazed at how many people will come to that conference to share what they know with everyone. Like they're going to walk in like they should have a crown on their head. I come there to learn. My attitude is, are you kidding me? Every time I'm with Ed Martin, I can learn a nugget. Charlie is going to be a Leadership Institute has trained 238,000 people worldwide. They are the #1 political training organization in the world. 37 current members of U.S. Congress were graduates of Leadership Institute. Over 100 members of their staff were trained. Charlie is one of the top 3 trainers for Leadership Institute. He has trained more members of Congress and legislative aides than most people will ever meet in their lifetime. And he's going to be live and in person. So I can guarantee you when he's talking, I'm not sitting in the back hoping everybody's taking pictures of me. I'm on the front taking notes, figuring what can I learn from this guy?
Exactly. Yes, we gotta continue learning because not one of us knows everything. They happen to know a specific piece of it, and someone in that room is going to take that and be able to move the bar up a little bit more. We're all holding this bar up. We're all helping to raise it higher, and we got to keep going. And one of the things I just want to touch on it just briefly is, and I think we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we have to work together. We have to stop infighting because they see that.
Oh, definitely.
They see that, and then we lose our credibility, we lose our momentum, and that means we lose our power. So in order to have our voices heard, we have to unite and we have to speak together as one voice.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how many people that want to keep this animosity between groups going. And I've already put my organization on notice. This year, I've tolerated it, and I'll acknowledge that I shouldn't have, but I've accepted it for too long. You can't do that. You know, Ed Martin doesn't infight with other there's over 100 other pro-life groups that are all fighting for the same dollars, the same supporters, everything. You don't fight with them. And unfortunately, so many people want to draw the line in the sand within our own turf. You can't be doing that. We don't shoot in our own foxhole.
I agree.
We've got enough opposition out there.
Which means you might lose friends, but you know, if you're going to make a difference, sometimes those friends are the ones that are keeping you back.
Yeah, good, very, very good point.
I think it's a competitive, it's something in human nature to be competitive or feel like there's scarcity out there. Like if somebody else is doing something I want to do, then I'll get edged out. And I'm like, no, there's room for everybody.
Well, I think it's like country running, you know, in practice, he competes against his buddies and they're competitors. But when they go to a meet, they're all on the same team.
Yep.
And even though when they're together, they may not, you know, they may try and, you know, talk smack and all kinds of stuff like that. But boy, I tell you what, when they go to a meet, they've got to be united because it's them against everybody else. And that's what we need people to realize is, look, if you have disagreements, keep them to yourself, but there is no competition. If our end goal, and you brought up another great point, Dawn, too, of we're going to end up passing this on. This will not get done in the next 5 or even 10 years. All the changes that need to be done with Title 40, with state laws, with parental alienation, it's going to take easily 10, 15, 20 years, which means we won't do it. And that's why we have people like
we better have our act together so that we have something to pass on.
Exactly. Yeah, we have Molly Olson that's going to be talking, that's been around for 20 something years. And, you know, she's told me several times, Mark, I appreciate what you're bringing to the table. It's something we've never had before. And I tell her, I'm like, Molly, we wouldn't have a table if it wasn't for you 20 years ago. The only reason I can do what I do and teach people is people went before me years ago to at least get us to where we are now.
The pioneers. Yeah, exactly. We had to have somewhere to start.
Don't you think that part of that is, it's been my experience that people who were in this work, who were the protesters, the person stomping up and down and screaming in front of the courthouses, they're nowhere to be found. These are people that the people who take the approach of, I'm going to squash it out with force and anger. They get lots of attention at first, but then they just fizzle out eventually they fizzle out, and they because nothing filled with negative kind of none of that approach has longevity.
Well, and you bring up a good point. We'll talk a little bit about that next weekend. Is when I look at people for who would I like in my inner circle, I normally look for who talks about a little bit of a game plan at least. If you're going to build a house, you're going to have a blueprint. You're not just going to walk out and say, you know what, I think I'll just build a wall here and see what happens here, and let's throw it. No, you're going to have a blueprint. Well, if you're going to change a law, you don't just say, let's get loud. That's not a strategy. Mm-hmm. You need to have some kind of an idea. And if you're going to have a strategy, that means before you can have the strategy, you need to analyze yourself with your own strengths and weaknesses before you can even get to the point where you're a player on the team. What are you good at? What are you weak at? Where do you need to partner with other people? And what do you need to work on? Because there's some things that, like myself, the verbiage of bills is something that needs to be done. That's not my expertise, but I don't need it to be my expertise. I can work on growing in other areas that I'm marginal in that need to be worked on more instead of working on that. Or research. Research is
strategy too that you're talking about. I'll admit, last year I went and sat in front of 3 of our congressmen, talking to them about the equal shared parenting bill that we were working on. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had never walked into a congressman's office before in my life. I've never even visited the Capitol building outside of a tour from school. So I really was totally green, had no idea what to expect and how it would flow. We sat there outside their door. We told them who we were. They liked that, and they wanted to give us some time. They said, well, you got 5 minutes. We met with 3 of them, and luckily, and I don't know how it happened, I'm grateful that it happened, but I got 15 minutes with each one of them. And we were able to talk about the shared parenting, and they did the talking. They wanted to talk about it. And so we went in with that right information, so I guess, and they really wanted to express their thoughts and their feelings about it. But that's not normal from what I'm hearing. That's probably the not normal thing to expect. But it was a great experience.
That's one thing we're obviously going to talk about is how to meet with the legislators and also how to analyze. A lot of times I'll get people and they'll say, well, I met with this legislator for an hour and I could tell when I said this resonated with them. And when I said this resonated with them. And what I usually listen for is who did most of the talking? If it was you and they're not asking for more questions, or if they make statements like, I hear this a lot of people are like, I know I got to them because they told me they were impressed with how much I knew. Oh, little tip there. If anybody ever tells you they're impressed with how much you know, they've read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and they're trying to find something to compliment you, even though they feel you just wasted an hour of their life and they don't want to hurt your feelings. So what they say is, wow, you sure know your stuff. That's a red flag for you're talking too long. Yeah. So
I like what you're doing, because in this conference, you're also doing a little role playing and showing people what to expect and how to approach somebody.
Yes. Yeah. We're going to be doing a lot of role playing this time, just because, like I said, that's one thing I've seen around the country. I have people that by themselves have gone in, and by the words they've told me, I can tell they've messed up. Matter of fact, I've had legislators call me from Missouri and have told me, look, this person was in my office. They have totally turned me off on your issue. Do not have them come to my office anymore. I avoid them when I see them. I mean, that's so you need to learn what are tips that you can learn. Are they asking questions? Are they keeping it going? Are you leaving first, or are they leaving first? If they stand up in the middle of the conversation to walk out the door, that's not a good sign.
They're chewing their arm off.
Well, I must have done their arm off. I lucked out.
No, based on what you said, it sounds like you did a good job, but we'll talk about ideas like that. You always want to leave them hungry for more. My goal is never to just cram a ton of information. I want them hungry for more.
Yeah,
Because
right.
we'll talk about that next weekend, but there's only so much they can absorb in one meeting. They're getting calls by hundreds of people on hundreds of different issues. They don't care about, the Fabricia study and Linda Nielsen. They need to know that you know that. And they need to know where they can get access to it if they need it. But you don't load them up with all that information. You'll allude to it.
In fact, I think what I did lead with, I had led with the child, and that we're doing this for the children, and that our state's children need your help in order to protect their rights to have access. And that was the, that presumption of equal shared parenting that I can't even remember it now. It's been so long. But we had that first session that it did pass in our House, but then it stalled in the Senate and COVID had hit. So they weren't doing anything else. So it just kind of like phased away. So it did go through again this year and it did pass, but it wasn't as powerful. There's definitely some more work that needs to be done for our state. So that is good to know that I didn't really screw it up, that I actually did something.
As long as you're in and out of there in under 15 minutes, and especially if they're asking questions, anybody who's been in an office more than 15 minutes, I get very nervous. If they ever tell me they've been in there 30 minutes.
If they're talking, let them talk.
Yeah.
All right, we've got like 2 minutes left before we gotta wrap it up.
Well, let's give it to Mark. Let's give it to Mark to wrap it up and one more poll for your conference next week, and then we will close it out.
Yeah, and I know it's getting down to the wire. So those people that are coming from out of town, you're gonna need to make a decision like today or tomorrow if you're flying in. If you're driving in, you have some more time. We've done everything we can to make it as economical as possible. But if you can make it in person, I encourage you get there. This is the Super Bowl of how to pass legislation. Now, let me clarify too, that's not in competition with any other group who's having conferences. Ours is specifically geared to legislation. But if you just can't make it, like I said, thanks to Danica, we've got a virtual option this year. So my gosh,
yep.
For $25, you could tap into most of the conference. If you can afford the VIP virtual, it would help us out and you'll have access to even more of the conference. But that way you don't have to pay the plane fare, the hotel. But I encourage you guys that I promise you it's matter of fact, I'll tell you, it's money back guaranteed. If you go to that conference or you tune in virtually, and you aren't satisfied that you got the value, I will get you your money back. I guarantee you, I've put some time and effort into making sure this will arm, equip, educate, and enable you to pass legislation in your state so you feel confident knowing what to do.
Awesome. Right. So the links are in some of the places where this is being viewed. I did post it in a couple places. Danica, you did as well?
I did. I shared it in several of the pages. And we're going to have a replay on Sunday of this conversation.
Okay, perfect. So if you go to Mark's page, if you go to Hope4Families, NPO Florida, the links are in those, in the comments below. So we have to put them in the comments now. So in order for Facebook to keep us scrolling, we have to play that. But thank you so much, Mark, for sharing all of this information and what you're doing to help further this in legislation, because we do need to work both ends. We do need to have people from that ground floor coming into this. We need more sets of eyes, ears, and hands, because many hands make light work, and we really need everybody to unify and work together. So I love the fact that you're educating those of us that can come and attend so that they know what to do. So you're not walking in unprepared like I was last year, scared out of my wits because I didn't know what to expect. I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad I did something right. But we don't want everybody